Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
They always said I was the good kid. Funny how good started meaning forgettable after a while, like being reliable was just another way to be invisible. I grew up in a town that smelled like wet grass and diesel fuel, where Sundays meant church and barbecue smoke hung in the air like an old prayer nobody really believed in anymore. Everybody knew everybody, and your business traveled faster than a high school rumor, but somehow, even in a place that small, it was like I barely left a footprint. My brother, Adam, was the kind of kid who didn't just leave footprints, he left craters. He was louder, faster, always 2 steps ahead, grinning with his arms wide open like the world owed him a standing ovation. He played football like it was a damn religion, quarterback by sophomore year, and when he threw a touchdown pass under the Friday night lights, it was like the entire town bent a knee and kissed his damn cleats. I remember sitting on those wooden bleachers, splinters digging into my jeans, clapping along with the crowd because that was just what you did. It didn't even sting back then, not really. I was proud of him, honest to God proud, even if Mom and Dad kept telling me, be more like your brother, Daniel. Look how he shines. Shines. That was their word. Like he was some gold coin pulled fresh from the earth, still warm and gleaming, and I was just the dirt he came out of. In school, I was the kid who turned homework in early, the one the teachers trusted to collect papers and babysit the classroom when they had to step out. I got straight A's like it was a bodily function. Breathe in, ace a test, breathe out. I got the honor roll every year, certificates piling up in a drawer that nobody ever opened. I even won the regional spelling bee once, standing there on stage in my best shirt, the fluorescent lights buzzing over my head like a swarm of bees. I remember looking out into the crowd, searching for their faces, wanting to see someone standing and clapping, someone proud enough to maybe yell out my name. They were there, of course. Mom, Dad, Adam, sitting about 6 rows back. But they clapped politely, no yelling, no standing, like they were watching somebody else's kid. Later that night, when we stopped at the diner for burgers, Mom spent most of dinner bragging to the waitress about Adam's football stats instead of my trophy. I kept spinning the little gold cup around and around in my hands under the table, wondering if it was possible to actually disappear if you wanted it bad enough. It wasn't just the big things either. It was 1,000 paper cuts, so small you almost thought you imagined them. Like the way Christmas mornings always seemed to be a little louder when Adam opened a gift. Like the way Mom's voice lifted an octave higher when she talked about his potential. Like the way Dad bought Adam a second-hand truck for his 16th birthday, while I got a firm handshake and a son, "You're doing great," the year I got accepted into a state college. People like to say parents don't have favorites. They say it like it's some kind of sacred rule, like gravity or taxes. But gravity doesn't pull harder on the prettier apple, and taxes don't show up softer for the kid who talks less. Parents do have favorites, whether they mean to or not. Sometimes it's the kid who reminds them of their better selves. Sometimes it's the one who's just easier to brag about at the grocery store. And sometimes it's the one who shines so bright that everybody else just looks dimmer standing next to him. Adam shone so damn bright, I swear you could have gotten a tan just standing next to him. By the time high school ended, Adam had a full scholarship to a fancy college on the other side of the state, and I was quietly piecing together my own future without much fanfare. I got into teaching because I liked history, liked the idea that maybe even the quiet ones could change the course of the world if they knew enough about it. Nobody threw a party for me when I chose my major. Nobody asked what my dreams were. They just said, "That's nice, Daniel," and then turned the conversation back to Adam's next big game. Sometimes I think about that town, those cracked sidewalks, those old brick buildings with paint peeling like sunburned skin, and I wonder how many other kids walked those streets feeling like extras in their own family's movie. You learn to live in the background if you're there long enough. You learn to take up less space. You learn to smile when you're hurting and to laugh a little too loud at jokes you don't find funny. You learn that being good doesn't mean being seen. It just means being easy to forget. But the thing about the quiet ones, the ones who slip through the cracks and walk the edges, is that they see everything. They remember everything. Every small slight, every turned back, every polite clap that didn't come with pride behind it. We store it away like acorns for the winter, bury it deep, let it harden into something cold and sharp and weighty. I didn't know it back then, sitting at that scratched-up kitchen table doing my homework while Mom buzzed around the kitchen gushing about Adam's latest touchdown. I didn't know it when I stood in the back at Adam's graduation, clapping until my palms ached. I didn't even know it when I accepted my first teaching job, bought my first cheap car, and drove off without anyone waving from the driveway. But one day, that weight was going to shift. One day, the invisible sun was going to make a move nobody saw coming. And when I did, nobody would be able to pretend I wasn't there anymore. By the time we were both grown men, the patterns from our childhood had hardened into something unbreakable, like old cement that cracked but never gave way. Adam, true to form, had taken his football hero glow and turned it into a full-blown construction company, complete with his name plastered in bright red letters on every pickup truck and half the billboards in our county. Adam didn't just build houses. He built palaces for the kind of people who wanted the world to know they had arrived. Big gates, big driveways, big chandeliers you could spot from the road if you squinted through the hedges. Every year, like clockwork, Adam rolled up to family gatherings in a newer, shinier truck, the tires so clean they looked factory fresh, the leather seats still giving off that new car smell you could taste if you got close enough. Meanwhile, I was teaching 10th grade history at the local high school, the same one Adam and I had graduated from, though nobody ever mentioned that when they introduced me at school board meetings or parent-teacher conferences. My car, a faded blue Corolla with a dent in the bumper I never got around to fixing, was parked around the corner from the big house my brother helped Mom refinance 3 years earlier. She liked to tell people Adam made it possible for her to stay in the family home after Dad passed away, though what she never said out loud was that the monthly mortgage payments were still killing her slowly, one envelope at a time. Family gatherings became a kind of theater where Adam played the lead, Mom clapped from the front row, and I worked the lights from somewhere backstage, trying not to trip over the cables. Thanksgiving, Christmas, 4th of July, whatever the occasion, Adam dominated the room like he owned the rights to our last name. He told loud stories about business deals, showed off pictures of beach vacations on his oversized phone, and laughed a little too hard at his own jokes while the rest of us leaned in like moths to a street lamp. Mom hung on every word, her smile stretched so wide I worried it might crack open and spill her insides onto the table. She always managed to slip in a comment about Adam's success, no matter the context, like seasoning she couldn't resist, shaking into every conversation. "You know, Adam just landed another big contract," she would say, passing the mashed potatoes like she was handing out golden bricks. "Built that new McMansion over on County Road 17. You should see it. Daniel, real impressive work." And I would smile because that was the script, right? I would nod and say something supportive, something that made it easier for her to keep believing that success came wrapped in a leather jacket and a $5,000 watch. I never once corrected her, never once reminded her that while Adam was busy building temples for people who measured their worth in square footage, I was teaching kids how the fall of Rome still echoed in every crumbling empire that thought it was too big to fail. Have you ever felt like no matter what you do, your family only sees who they wish you were instead of who you really are? Drop a comment if you've been the invisible one too. Sometimes I wonder if the people who love us the most are also the ones who know us the least, if they keep polishing the version of us they prefer until the real thing gets buried underneath. It wasn't just the gatherings, it was in the way Mom decorated her living room. Every picture frame told a story, but you had to look hard to find me in the narrative. There were framed photos of Adam in his cap and gown, Adam shaking hands with some mayor or businessman I didn't recognize, Adam grinning next to the giant fake check he got for some local business award. My pictures were there too, technically small wallet-sized snapshots tucked into the corners of the bigger frames, like afterthoughts or footnotes nobody bothered to read. The resentment didn't come all at once, not like a storm you could see rolling in across the fields. It seeped in slow, like water under a doorframe, warping the wood over years until one day you realized the whole foundation was crooked. I started finding excuses to leave family events early, volunteering for extra shifts at school, or staying late to organize the supply closet nobody asked me to clean. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need their validation, that the quiet victories in my classroom were enough to fill whatever hole they had left inside me. But some nights, when the house was dark and the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator, I would catch myself staring at the ceiling and wondering what it would have felt like to have someone brag about me just once the way they bragged about him. To have someone say, "That's my son," with a kind of pride so thick it coated their tongue and made every word heavier, more meaningful. Instead, I got the polite smiles, the casual pats on the back, the "we're so proud of you," Daniel spoken in the same tone people use when they compliment a stranger's dog at the park. Meanwhile, Adam could fart in the middle of dinner and Mom would find a way to turn it into a TED Talk about his incredible digestive system and how it must be genetic greatness at work. So I stayed quiet. I clapped when expected. I laughed when cued. And I buried the bitterness a little deeper each time, packing it down tight, layering it under memories and good intentions and all the small lies we tell ourselves to survive family gatherings. But bitterness, like anything left buried too long, doesn't disappear. It grows roots. It builds pressure. And one day, it bursts the ground wide open, whether you are ready for it or not. Thanksgiving always carried with it a certain weight in our family, a kind of tired tradition that nobody dared to break, no matter how badly we all wanted to be somewhere else. The smells of roasted turkey, buttered rolls, and burnt coffee filled Mom's house so thick you could taste them before you even stepped through the door, and the windows would fog over from the heat of the kitchen as if the house itself was trying to sweat out its old ghosts. That year was no different, except for the crackling sense under my skin that I couldn't seem to shake, like I was walking into a test I already knew I was going to fail. Adam arrived late, naturally, storming in with his usual clatter of expensive boots and big stories, his truck still humming outside, like some mechanical beast refusing to sleep. He brought a bottle of top-shelf whiskey tucked under his arm and a girlfriend I had never seen before clinging to the other, a woman so polished she looked like she might shatter if you breathed too hard near her. Mom lit up the second she saw him, her smile snapping into place like a well-worn mask, and I watched her nearly trip over herself offering him a plate, a drink, a seat, anything he could want. Nobody noticed I had been there for an hour already, setting the table, carving the turkey, stirring the gravy that kept trying to burn onto the stove. That was the thing about being invisible. You didn't have to announce your arrival because nobody was looking for you anyway. I settled into my usual seat, a corner of the long wooden table worn smooth by years of elbows and spilled drinks, and tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that I was used to it, that it was just another holiday to survive. The first hour wasn't so bad. There was the usual small talk, the clinking of silverware, the polite lies about how good everything tasted even though the stuffing was dry and the green beans had been boiled into submission. Mom floated between us like a hostess at a party she wasn't quite invited to, topping off wine glasses and forcing laughter into the quiet spaces. Adam held court at the head of the table, regaling us with stories about his latest business venture, how he had just bought a second property up north. A cabin by a lake he hadn't even seen yet, but knew would be perfect because the realtor was a top-notch guy. I nodded where appropriate, smiled when everyone else laughed, and counted the minutes until I could leave without seeming rude. Then the second bottle of wine was opened, and everything shifted, like the floorboards under our chairs had started to give way. Mom got that flush in her cheeks she always did when she was just drunk enough to say things better left unsaid, her words slurring slightly at the edges, the volume of her voice rising as if she thought we had all gone deaf. She reached across the table to pat Adam's hand with a kind of drunken reverence and said, "You know, Adam, you really made something of yourself. Not like some people who just teach." The room went very still, the kind of stillness you only notice when it slams into you, cold and sudden. I felt every eye at that table flicker toward me and then just as quickly flicker away, like looking directly at me might somehow make it worse. I smiled because what else was I supposed to do? Scream? Cry? Flip the goddamn table and storm out into the night like some character in a soap opera nobody respected? "You're just a teacher, Daniel," she said, laughing in that brittle way that always made me feel like a cracked plate someone was still trying to serve dinner on. "Not a real success like your brother." Adam chuckled awkwardly and looked down at his plate, and his girlfriend made a little oh dear face and took a long sip of wine, and nobody, not one person, said a word to stop her or soften the blow. I sat there, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth, the turkey growing cold and rubbery on my plate, and I swallowed everything that wanted to come up, all the words and anger and heartbreak, pushing it down into the pit of my stomach where it could rot quietly without making a scene. It is a strange thing, the way a heart can break so silently you wonder if anyone else even heard the sound. I kept chewing, kept swallowing, kept pretending it didn't matter, but every bite tasted like ashes, like something beautiful turned into something ruined and ugly right there in my hands. After dinner, I helped clean up because that's what good sons do, stacking plates and scrubbing pans while Adam poured Mom another drink and talked about expansion plans and profit margins. I didn't speak unless spoken to, and even then, I kept my words clipped and pleasant, the way you do with strangers you don't trust not to hurt you. When it was finally late enough to leave without raising eyebrows, I gathered my coat and keys, kissed Mom's cheek with lips that felt numb, and told her I would call her next week. She smiled at me, still tipsy, still glowing from Adam's attention, and told me, "You're a good boy, Daniel," like she was patting a dog on the head. Driving home, the night stretched out around me, black and endless, the road swallowing the little Corolla whole. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white, and somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd mile marker, I realized something cold and hard had snapped loose inside me, something I couldn't fix or tape back together no matter how hard I tried. Maybe you can only swallow so much before you start choking on it. Maybe being invisible was safer after all because at least when people don't see you, they can't aim when they throw their knives. That night, I made a silent promise to myself, one that tasted bitter and real, like blood in the back of my throat. I would never ask for a seat at their table again. And the next time they thought of me, it wouldn't be with pity. It would be with something much closer to regret. The thing about real anger, the kind that settles deep into your bones and makes a permanent home there, is that it doesn't usually burn hot the way movies and novels like to show it. No, the real stuff, the kind you don't come back from, burns cold and steady, like an old stove you barely notice until you realize it's been heating the room all along. That was me, the night after Thanksgiving, sitting alone at my kitchen table with the overhead light buzzing softly above my head, the leftover turkey untouched in a foil-wrapped plate beside me. I stared at the peeling corners of my bills and bank statements, letting the silence soak into my skin until it felt like armor. I wasn't mad in the way they expected, not stomping and shouting and slamming doors like some angry kid who couldn't get his way. No, the anger I felt was quieter, sharper, like a scalpel in a surgeon's hand, steady, precise, deliberate. I didn't want to yell at them. I didn't want to beg for their approval anymore. I wanted something better. I wanted proof, something solid and undeniable, a mark they couldn't ignore even if they tried. It started almost by accident, one of those small ideas that worms its way into your brain and refuses to let go. I was thumbing through the local newspaper, avoiding grading essays, when I saw an ad for a mortgage refinancing service. I didn't even know why I tore it out at first, just that my hands seemed to move before my brain caught up. Maybe part of me had already decided without even realizing it. I drove by Mom's house the next day under the excuse of dropping off some holiday leftovers, but really, I just wanted to see it through new eyes. It was the same house I had grown up in, the same cracked driveway and sagging porch swing, but now it looked smaller, sadder somehow, like a once proud soldier stooping under the weight of years nobody bothered to count anymore. Mom came to the door wearing the same threadbare cardigan she always wore, her smile wide but her eyes shadowed in a way I hadn't seen before. She was still paying off the place, she mentioned casually between talk of Christmas plans and Adam's new lake house. It was almost paid off, she said proudly, just a few years left, though the payments were a bit steep nowadays. She laughed it off, the way people do when they are scared, but too proud to say it out loud. And that's when the idea fully bloomed inside me, so clear and certain it felt like it had been waiting there all along, like a loaded gun hidden in the back of a drawer. I went home and pulled out every financial document I had, laying them across my tiny kitchen table until it looked like a crime scene. Savings, retirement fund, a small inheritance from my father that I had tucked away and forgotten about, all of it totaled up to a number that made my stomach turn over, not because it was small, but because it was enough. Enough to do something they could never ignore. Enough to leave a mark so deep they would trip over it every time they walked through the front door. Breaking the retirement fund was the hardest part, not because I cared about the money so much, but because it felt like setting fire to the last little safety net I had kept tucked away for myself. I had always been the careful one, the steady one, the kid who triple-checked his homework and balanced his checkbook down to the last penny. But sitting there under the humming light, breathing in the stale air of my rented kitchen, I realized careful had never gotten me anything but forgotten. Maybe it was time to be reckless, just once, in a way that mattered. I made the calls. I signed the paperwork. I withdrew the funds with hands that barely shook. There was a penalty fee for early withdrawal, a big ugly number that would have made the old version of me wince, but I didn't even blink. If they thought I was a nobody, fine. Nobodies can still write checks. Nobodies can still change the game. The day the final payment went through, I drove back to Mom's house, this time with no leftovers to deliver, no excuses in my back pocket. I sat in my car across the street for almost an hour, just watching the windows light up one by one as the sun went down. It should have felt triumphant, like some cinematic moment where the underdog finally wins, but all I felt was tired. Not defeated, just bone-deep tired, like I had been carrying a weight for so long I had forgotten what it felt like to put it down. Inside my jacket pocket, I had the deed papers, crisp and official, along with a short handwritten note I had rewritten a dozen times until it was exactly right. No anger, no pleading, just a few neat words printed in black ink that I knew would stick to the inside of their skulls long after they read them. I didn't ring the doorbell. I just tucked the envelope into the mail slot and walked away, the sound of it sliding onto the hardwood floor behind the door almost deafening in the quiet night. As I drove off, the weight didn't lift the way I had imagined it would. It settled deeper somehow, like an anchor dropped into some part of me I didn't even know existed. But that was okay. Sometimes you don't need to feel light to know you've finally let something go. Sometimes you just need the satisfaction of knowing that the people who never saw you coming would be forced, at last, to reckon with the fact that you had been there all along. There was something deeply satisfying, almost surgical, about the way the final steps unfolded. Like every little insult and sideways glance from the last 35 years had been meticulously catalogued inside me and was now being carefully laid out on a table under a bright, merciless light. I paid off the mortgage behind Mom's back, each payment made quietly, almost reverently, as if I were performing a kind of strange penance for every time I had smiled and swallowed my pride instead of standing up and demanding to be seen. There was no fanfare, no moment of glory when the last payment went through, just a simple confirmation email blinking at me from my laptop screen, cold and impersonal and final. The house was hers now, or at least, that was what she would have thought if I had stopped there. And maybe in another life, I would have. Maybe a better man would have left it at that, given the gift with clean hands and a clear conscience, walking away with a sense of quiet dignity that would never be recognized, but would still mean something. but I was done being the better man. I was done swallowing the things that should have choked me years ago. I was ready to let the bitterness bloom, not with fists or shouting, but with paperwork and ink and consequences they wouldn't see coming until it was far too late. I went down to the county office early on a Tuesday morning when the place was still empty except for a tired-looking receptionist and a maintenance guy pushing a mop down the hall. The paperwork was straightforward, boring even, just a stack of forms and a few dozen signatures that would change the shape of everything they thought they understood about me. I signed the deed over to Adam, every letter of his name pressed hard into the paper with a ballpoint pen that scratched like nails on a chalkboard. No witnesses. No ceremony. Just the simple, brutal efficiency of the system grinding into motion. Along with the deed, I tucked in a handwritten note, the same one I had rewritten over and over again late at night until the words were perfect, sharp enough to leave a scar, but clean enough that no one could ever accuse me of being cruel outright. Paid in full, the note said at the top and underneath, in neat, deliberate print, ask your real success to cover the taxes too. No greetings. No goodbyes. Just the facts laid out bare, daring them to interpret it however they wanted, but leaving no room for misunderstanding. You see, what most people don't realize is that owning a house outright isn't the end of the story. It's just the start of a new chapter full of hidden strings and obligations they never bother to warn you about. Property taxes, maintenance costs, insurance renewals, the kind of slow, grinding responsibilities that pile up year after year until they feel heavier than the mortgage ever did. By signing the house over to Adam, I wasn't giving him a gift. I was handing him a ticking time bomb wrapped up in a pretty little bow, one he would be too proud to refuse and too smart to ignore. I dropped the envelope in Mom's mailbox myself later that afternoon, slipping it through the slot without even stepping onto the porch. There was a small part of me, buried somewhere deep and trembling, that wondered if I was crossing a line I could never uncross, if I was burning a bridge that, despite everything, some corner of my heart still hoped might one day be repaired. But that part of me was small now, a withered thing barely worth listening to, and the larger part, the part that had spent a lifetime biting my tongue until it bled, was ready to see what happened when the scales finally tipped the other way. Driving away, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious or righteous, or even particularly proud. I just felt empty, like I had reached the top of a hill I had been climbing my whole life, only to find the other side, dropped off into a dark, endless void. Maybe that's the way it always goes when you finally stop trying to earn love that was never really yours to begin with. Maybe it's not about winning or losing, but about finally accepting that some games are rigged from the start. That night, I sat in my living room with the television off, the silence pressing down heavy against the windows, and I poured myself a glass of cheap whiskey I had been saving for no particular occasion. I sipped it slow, letting the burn trace a path down my throat, and stared at the blank wall across from me, wondering what the next move would be now that the first shot had been fired. I imagined Mom opening the envelope, her hands trembling just a little when she realized the house was hers, and then, almost immediately, not hers at all. I pictured her calling Adam in a panic, asking what to do, her voice quivering the way it used to when the checkbook didn't balance or the car wouldn't start. I pictured Adam's face tightening as he realized the golden boy would now have to get his hands dirty cleaning up the mess left behind by all that blind praise and easy love. And somewhere in that quiet, bitter imagining, I realized I didn't care how they reacted. Not really. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about making them hurt the way they had made me hurt. It was about finally, irrevocably, refusing to be the afterthought, the footnote, the ghost wandering the edges of their lives. For once, I wasn't asking to be seen. I was forcing them to notice the empty space I would leave behind. I woke up the next morning to the sharp, insistent buzzing of my phone rattling against the nightstand, a sound so jarring and foreign in the early quiet that for a split second, I thought maybe it was an alarm I had forgotten to set. The sunlight was just starting to creep through the slats of the blinds, painting long, dusty stripes across the floor and the whole world felt heavy and slow, like the air itself was thinking twice about moving. I stared at the screen through bleary eyes, blinking hard until the name lit up clear and undeniable: Mom. It had been a long time since she called me first thing in the morning, or really called me at all without some sense of obligation curling like smoke through her words. Usually, I got a text about a family event, a forwarded meme she didn't quite understand, or worse, the long, awkward silence that stretches across years and makes you wonder if maybe they've finally forgotten how to find you. But this morning, she was calling, and something in the pit of my stomach told me exactly why. I answered on the third ring, letting it buzz in my hand longer than necessary, a small, petty delay that I couldn't stop myself from savoring. "Morning, Mom," I said, my voice even, almost pleasant, like we were about to have a conversation about groceries or the weather and not the bomb I had dropped at her feet the night before. Her voice came through the line sharp and brittle, cracking in places I had never heard it crack before. She wasn't just upset, she was crying, real gut-deep sobs that shook her words apart and left them scattered and half-formed. It took her a minute just to get my name out, and when she did, it sounded like it hurt her to say it. "Daniel. I don't understand. Why would you do this?" I leaned back in the chair by the window, letting the wood creak under my weight, and watched a pair of birds fight over a crust of bread on the sidewalk outside. I felt strangely detached, like I was watching someone else's life unfold, someone else's mother breaking apart on the other end of the line. "What do you mean?" I asked calmly, though we both knew damn well I knew exactly what she meant. "You paid off the house," she said, her breath hitching hard on the words like they weighed too much for her to lift. "And you signed it over to Adam." "Why, Daniel? Why would you do that to me?" I didn't answer right away, giving her silence instead of comfort, letting the empty space stretch long and uncomfortable between us. I wanted her to feel it, to sit in it the way I had sat in every unspoken slight, every misplaced praise, every Thanksgiving dinner where my name was just background noise to Adam's latest triumph. "I thought you'd be happy," I said finally, my tone light and almost cruel in its indifference. "You always said Adam was the real success. Figured he could handle the responsibility." There was a long pause on the other end, just the sound of her breathing, ragged and uneven, and for a moment I thought she might hang up, that this whole messy confrontation might end not with a bang, but with a sad little click and a dial tone. But she stayed, stubborn as ever, pushing through the pain the way she had pushed through everything else in her life, determined to wrestle it into something manageable. "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking into a whisper so small I had to strain to hear it. "Adam, he doesn't want the house. He's already talking about selling it. He says he can't afford the taxes, the upkeep. He's too busy with work. He doesn't have time to deal with it." I closed my eyes and let her words wash over me, feeling something inside me harden further, something that had started to calcify years ago and was now almost complete. I wasn't surprised, not really. Adam loved the shine of things, the flash and glitter and applause, but he had never been built for maintenance, for the slow, grinding work of keeping something alive when no one was clapping for you. He built monuments to himself and moved on before the paint was even dry. "You should talk to him about it," I said, the words smooth and sharp as broken glass. "After all, he's the successful one. I'm just a teacher, remember?" Another sob cracked out of her, raw and painful, and for a second, just a second, I almost wavered. I almost let the old instincts take over, the ones that had spent a lifetime trying to make her feel better, to patch over the holes she punched into me without even noticing. But I didn't. I sat there, quiet and steady, letting her feel every jagged edge of what she had made. "I didn't mean it like that," she whispered, but we both knew she had, and no amount of backpedaling was going to erase it. "I know," I said, my voice so soft it barely felt like mine. "It's okay." And in a way, it was okay, because it was done now, the die was cast, and nothing she could say would unmake the choice I had finally, irrevocably made. I had given her exactly what she had always wanted, and now she would have to live with it. "Love you, Mom," I said at last, not because I wanted to comfort her, but because it was the truth, raw and complicated and ugly as it was. I did love her. I loved her enough to finally let her see me, even if it broke her heart in the process. Then I ended the call and sat there in the quiet morning, the sun creeping higher over the rooftops, feeling strangely, perfectly alone. The explosion came faster than I expected, and it was so loud, so messy, it felt almost theatrical, like something straight out of one of those soap operas Mom used to watch religiously in the afternoons while she folded laundry. Adam, it turned out, did not take well to being saddled with responsibility he didn't choose, responsibility that came without applause or photo opportunities, or the kind of shiny payoff he was used to chasing. The call came barely 2 days after Mom had found the deed in the note, and I let it go to voicemail the first 3 times just because I could, just because I wanted him to feel what it was like to reach for something and come up empty. When I finally answered, he didn't waste a second pretending he wasn't furious, his voice already raised, sharp and cutting, filled with the kind of anger that only comes when someone's pride has been bruised in front of an audience they cannot control. "What the hell, Daniel?" He barked without even saying hello, and I pictured him pacing some oversized living room with a drink in one hand and his phone clutched so tight in the other it might snap in two. "You think this is funny? You think this is some kind of sick joke?" I didn't answer right away, letting the silence stretch so taut I could almost hear him grinding his teeth on the other end. It was a trick I learned in the classroom, the power of letting someone exhaust themselves against your stillness, like waves crashing uselessly against a stone. Finally, when he was practically vibrating with rage, I said, "It's not a joke, Adam. It's a house. You're welcome." That simple, calm sentence made him lose what little composure he had left, and for the next few minutes, he launched into a tirade that covered everything from property taxes to maintenance costs to how unfair it was that he was now stuck with a crumbling house he never wanted and had no time to deal with. He talked about lawyers, about loopholes, about how maybe he could sell it off fast before the next round of bills hit, and I listened quietly, nodding even though he couldn't see me, feeling the words wash over me without leaving a mark. When he finally wound down, panting a little from the effort of his anger, he spat out the words that should have hurt but somehow didn't. "You're pathetic, Daniel. You're so desperate for attention you'd screw over your own mother just to get it." I almost laughed then, not because it was funny but because it was so perfectly, tragically predictable, the way he twisted everything into a narrative where he was still somehow the victim, still somehow the golden boy under attack from the jealous, petty brother who could never measure up. But I didn't laugh. I didn't yell. I didn't explain myself or try to make him understand. I just said, "Good luck with the taxes," and hung up, the click of the call ending feeling heavier, more final, than anything I had said. Of course, it didn't stop there. The drama spilled over into the rest of the family, as it always does when money and property get involved. Suddenly, the group texts that had been mostly silent for years were lighting up with accusations and guilt trips and awkward attempts to mediate a situation none of them understood and none of them wanted to touch with a 10-foot pole. Cousins I hadn't spoken to since high school popped up offering unsolicited advice. Aunts and uncles weighed in with passive-aggressive reminders about family loyalty and not airing dirty laundry, as if any of them had ever cared enough to fold the laundry in the first place. Mom tried to smooth it over, of course. She called me twice, left long, rambling voicemails where her voice swung wildly between pleading and scolding, trying to convince me to fix this before it tore the family apart. But I didn't call her back. I didn't answer the texts. I didn't explain myself or apologize or defend what I had done. I stayed silent, the way I had stayed silent through a lifetime of dinners and holidays and birthdays where my name was just background noise to Adam's spotlight. And in that silence, something strange and hollow grew inside me. I thought I would feel triumphant, standing there watching the cracks spread through the shiny facade they had spent so long building around themselves. I thought I would feel vindicated, justified, maybe even proud that I had finally forced them to see the truth, to see me. But instead, all I felt was tired. Tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix, tired down to the marrow of my bones. I sat alone in my apartment that night, a beer growing warm in my hand, listening to the distant sound of sirens and car horns outside the window, and I asked myself the question I hadn't dared to face before. Was this revenge, or justice, or just pettiness dressed up as something nobler? Had I really made a point, or had I just lashed out like a wounded animal, hurting the only people who still cared enough to hurt me back? There were no easy answers, no comforting lies I could tell myself to make the ache go away. Maybe it was a little of all three. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe, in the end, the only thing that mattered was that, for once, they couldn't ignore me. Even if they hated me for it, they couldn't pretend I wasn't there anymore. And for better or worse, that would have to be enough. 6 months later, the house that had once been the center of so many battles, silent betrayals, and unspoken grievances stood empty, its windows staring blankly out at the cracked driveway, the overgrown lawn leaning wild against the breeze like it had given up waiting for someone to care. Time had moved on, as it always does, dragging us all along with it whether we were ready or not, and the world outside seemed almost oblivious to the slow, painful unraveling that had taken place behind closed doors. Mom's health had started to slip not long after the fallout from the deed transfer, and though I would never say it out loud, there was a part of me that wondered if the stress of it, the cold shock of realizing that her golden boy was not the savior she had believed him to be, had been the final crack in a foundation that had been crumbling for years. Adam, ever the practical one when inconvenience knocked on his door, had quickly made arrangements to move her into an assisted living facility just outside of town, a place with bright hallways and manufactured smiles, where the air always smelled faintly of bleach and overripe flowers. The facility was clean, professional, and utterly impersonal, a place designed not to be lived in but managed, where the elderly were tucked away like forgotten heirlooms gathering dust in someone else's attic. I visited sometimes, bringing small things I knew she missed, real coffee instead of the watery sludge they served in the dining hall, soft cardigans that smelled like home, old photo albums worn thin from decades of turning pages back to better times. We would sit in the common room, her in a wheelchair now, blanket draped over her knees even in the summer heat, and I would listen to her talk about nothing much at all, letting the words drift between us like smoke from a fire long since gone cold. She never mentioned the house anymore, never brought up Adam except in vague, half-formed sentences that trailed off into silence. It was as if her mind had decided to smooth over the jagged parts, filing down the edges until even the sharpest memories were nothing more than dull, harmless shapes she could turn over in her hands without fear of getting cut. I never pushed her, never asked if she blamed me, never tried to fill the empty spaces between us with explanations or apologies that neither of us could bear to hear. Adam visited less and less as the months wore on, his appearances becoming rarer, more performative, the visits more about easing his own guilt than offering any real comfort. He would show up with expensive flowers, sign a few forms at the front desk, pat Mom's hand awkwardly, and then disappear again. Swallowed up by whatever business deal or social engagement seemed more urgent than the slow fading of the woman who had once worshipped him like a golden calf. Sometimes I wondered if he felt any real regret, if he lay awake at night thinking about the way he had turned his back when the weight got too heavy, or if he simply compartmentalized it the way he did everything else, shoving the messy, inconvenient parts of life into some dark corner of his mind where they couldn't tarnish the shiny image he worked so hard to maintain. I would catch glimpses of him sometimes on billboards or local TV commercials, flashing that same bright, empty smile, selling dreams of perfect homes to people who still believed that walls and windows could make them safe from the inevitable breaking of things. There were nights when I thought about picking up the phone, about calling him just to see if there was anything left to salvage between us, but every time my hand hovered over the receiver, a heavy stillness settled over me, rooting me in place. What would I say, anyway? That I was sorry? That I wasn't sorry? That some part of me still wanted him to look at me the way he used to, before ambition and resentment had built walls so high we could no longer even see each other from opposite sides? In the end, I let the silence hold. It was easier that way, easier to visit Mom, bring her small comforts, and leave without stirring the ashes of a fire that was better left burned out. I became good at pretending, good at smiling and making small talk with the nurses, good at sitting through the endless bingo nights and hymn sing-alongs, good at pretending that everything was fine, that this slow, quiet dying was just another part of life we all had to accept. But sometimes, late at night when the city had fallen silent and the only sounds were the ticking of the clock and the distant hum of traffic, I would sit in my darkened living room and wonder if I had really changed anything at all. I had wanted so badly to make a statement, to leave a mark, to force them to see me after all the years of invisibility, but standing here now, months later, with the wreckage scattered around me, it was hard to tell if I had won or simply found a new way to lose. Maybe the truth was simpler and sadder than I wanted to admit. Maybe in the end, no matter how hard we try to rewrite the story, some debts can never really be paid, just transferred.